Romans chapter 11, where we're going to get started. I would say the overarching, I guess the thought for chapter 11 is the idea of God's rejection of Israel and Israel's rejection of God, because it is a two-way street. God did not reject Israel until Israel rejected God. He went after them constantly, and we see that mirrored, of course, in the book of Hosea. As Hosea went after Gomer time and time and time again, God went after Israel time and time and time and time again, and finally, He made her a slave in His own household. Talking about Hosea, and God at this point said, "You know, I'm pouring out my grace upon the Gentiles." That's what He's going to do, and we of course know that happened because the gospel had been delivered to the Gentiles. So, anyway, let's get into chapter 11, and we'll start, of course, at verse 1. It says, "I say then, has God cast away His people?" Well, who are God's people in the biblical sense? The Jews, okay, the Israelites. The Jews were God's people. So I say then, has God cast away His people? Certainly not. For I also am an Israelite of the seed of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin. I mean, his Jewish credentials are on full display here. I mean, there's no doubting where he was from. God has not cast away His people, whom He foreknew. Or do you not know what the Scripture says of Elijah, how he pleads with God against Israel? And look at what he says. You know, here's Elijah, and he's asking God to smite him. Why would Elijah ask God to smite the Israelites? Yeah, I mean, truthfully, Elijah's pleading with God against Israel in the same way that Moses pleaded with God for Israel. You know, I know they've done these things. I know they've committed these sins. I know they're a stubborn and obstinate people, Lord, but please don't smite them. Well, Elijah's going the other direction. Look at what they've done. Lord, they've killed your prophets. They've torn down your altars, and I alone am left, and they seek my life. So you have two people, Moses with the love of the people in his heart, and Elijah with a desire for vengeance. You know, his idea of, they've done everything they possibly can to destroy us, Lord. Now's the time. Smite these people. All right, but what does the divine response say to him? What does He say He's done? They haven't all left. What have they done? There is a remnant. A remnant of what? 7,000 men who have not what? Okay. What is He saying here? What place could this response have in response to Elijah's pleading with Him to destroy the nation? What good does this make? Or what does this say? Where does this come into play? What's the deal? Why? Why would God say, well, no, because I've reserved for myself, or there's a remnant of 7,000 men who have not bowed the knee to Baal? God is what? Long-suffering. God is long-suffering. You think about it. He says, if I find 50 people who are faithful, will you not destroy the city? Remember that exchange? What about 40? What about 30? What about 10? I won't destroy it for 10 if you can find 10. What does that tell us about God's attitude towards His people? He has an amount of patience that really boggles the mind, honestly. Think about us now. We are not divine in that sense. We are not God-like. Okay, we can be godly, and we should strive towards godliness, but we are not God-like. You think about a God who sees His prophets killed and His altars torn down. What would one of the pagans what would one of the pagan gods do in a situation like this? It'd be scorched earth policy, wouldn't it? If those gods were real and that's what was happening to their prophets and their priests, it would be scorched earth. I'm going to destroy everything. I'm going to raise the whole thing. It's going to be burned to the ground. What does God say? No, because there are 7,000 men who have not bowed the knee to Baal, who are still faithful to me. You don't know about them. You may not know who they are. They may be in hiding. They may be away from you. You don't know who they are or where they are or what's going on, but I am all-knowing. I am all-powerful. I know what's happening. Don't presume to speak for me. Don't presume to pass judgment for me. I'm in control, and I am infinitely patient. I have an infinite amount of love and respect and forbearance for my people. And that's what he promises. Warning. All right. So, and this is what was happening when? Back in the days of Elijah, back in the days of the prophets. So now let's look at verse 5. Even so then, all right, likewise manner. Even today, what? As Paul is writing to the church at Rome, the Christians at Rome, what does Paul say? Even so then, at this present time, there is a remnant according to the election of grace. Election of grace. And if by grace, then it is no longer of... Okay. Now, here it gets into this idea of faith, or grace versus works, and faith versus works. What is he saying here? How have we received the message of salvation? How have we received the salvation through Christ? Is it because of anything that we have done? Is it because of our strict adherence to the law? No. God's grace said, I am going to make a way for you. I'm going to give you a way that you can be reconciled to me, but not because of anything that you possibly could have done. There's nothing we can do to earn grace. That's the whole point behind grace. Grace is unmerited favor. I don't care if we piled up bulls and goats to the top of the mountaintops, set it all on fire, and did that constantly day after day after day. Because remember, that was the method by which, under the old days, the sins were rolled forward and they were remembered not for a year. It was through the sacrificial system. Nothing we did could earn or merit grace. So when we understand this idea of election, or the method by which we are reconciled to God, that method comes through grace. The method comes through grace. Not salvation comes through grace. Salvation comes through the election. It comes through immersion in water for the forgiveness of sins. But how did that method come to us? It came to us only by grace, not by works. Because otherwise grace is no longer grace. Okay. But if it is of works, it is no longer grace. Otherwise work is no longer work. I like that it's an interesting turn of phrase. If it is of works, it is no longer grace. What does that mean? It means that we can buy our salvation, right? We can earn our salvation. We can do something that makes us worthy of being saved. That kind of flies in the face of the whole idea of grace. It's unmerited. There's nothing we can do in and of ourselves. Okay, so what then? All right, the question is, Israel has not obtained what it seeks. What did it seek? What does Israel say? It says Israel has not, and that's a present tense, has not, present indicative, Israel has not obtained what it seeks. What does it seek? Reconciliation with God, being God's people. It's not obtained what it seeks. But what? The elect have attained it. Who are the elect? Yeah, New Testament Christians. Those who have been added to the church through immersion for the remission of sins. That's who he's talking about. The elect have obtained it. Israel hasn't even obtained it, but we have. You know, because guess what? While Israel's still searching for it, they're still wanting it, they still desire it, the people that they look down their noses at are the ones who have actually obtained it. The Gentiles have obtained salvation. We've obtained election. And they're still searching for it. Why? Because they're not looking in the right direction. They rejected the chief cornerstone. They rejected it. So we, as the elect, have obtained something that they have been searching for thousands and thousands of years. Still searching for it. And I don't know, I don't keep up that much with Judaism. There's so many different facets of it and so many different sects of it. I don't really know. I honestly don't know if they're even still searching for a Redeemer. If they're even still searching for a Messiah. I'm beginning to wonder if the Jewish people have just decided to be placeholders. We're Jewish because we've always been Jewish. And my children will be Jewish, even though it doesn't avail anything, even though we don't really... I've been led to believe that a great many people in the Jewish faith don't even really believe in heaven or hell anymore. It's a lifestyle, and we've always engaged in this lifestyle, so we'll always continue to engage in this lifestyle. So we're Jews in name only. But here, at least in this particular point, the Jews were still searching for that. even though the elect were the ones that... Now, this is the thing. We can't declare a sharp line in between Israel and the elect, because where did the early church come from? The Jews. Who were the 3,000 people, who were the 3,000 souls that were saved at Pentecost? Likely 3,000, maybe 2,999 of them were Jews. So we can't say, well, if you're either Israel or you're elect, because there were plenty of people, there were plenty of Israelites, there were plenty of Jews who were part of the elect. They became New Testament Christians. They believed and they confessed their sins, and they were baptized for the remission of their sins, and they received the gift of the Holy Spirit. But here he's talking about Jews as a whole, the Jews who still cling to the Mosaic law, still cling to the old law, and their obedience and knowledge of it was enough for them. They rejected I'm going to take that back. Their knowledge of it was enough for them. The problem was there was no obedience to it. Okay? And when I say obedience, I'm talking about to the old law. Their obedience to the old law, the sacrifices, the tithing, all of those things, they still believed that was, they had rejected the culmination of the law, the punctuation, the exclamation point in the law that was Jesus Christ. You know, I didn't come to destroy it, I came to finish it, complete it. Okay? All right. So he says, Israel has not obtained what it seeks, but the elect have obtained it, and the rest were blinded. Okay? So those who... Okay? So, all right, let's look at that for just a second. Let's think about that for just a second. Here's Israel, the body of Israel, the great nation of Israel, okay? Here it is, and some of them have come out of it. So we know that at least on the day of Pentecost, 3,000, likely many more, you know, because they were the ones that were taking it as they were leaving Jerusalem and going back to their homes after the day of Pentecost. They were taking this gospel message back to their hometowns and preaching the gospel and so forth and so on. So let's just, I'm giving a number because it's helpful to do so. All right. So you have, say, 500,000 Jewish believers, and then you have 10,000 of them have come out through their election. Okay, that election they've been brought out of the nation of Israel, and they've been placed in the church of Jesus Christ. So we have, say, 500,000 Jews, 10,000 of them come out. What have the rest of them done? What does it say it's done? They've been what? Blinded, or they've been hardened. Okay? So all of these have come out because of their election. They've come out into the church. They've said, we believe that Jesus, this one who died, was the Son of God. We've come out of believing and practicing the law. We are now in Christ. But it says the rest of them have been blinded or hardened. What does that mean? Yeah, it's an intentional rejection. It's we will not. Have you ever seen somebody that believes something and believes it so hard, and then you confront them in something, and what do? They double down. They get even harder against it. It's like, I've been confronted with the truth. I'm going to believe even less that that's the truth. I'm gonna stiffen my back and back my ears, and I will reject it at this point now because I've been confronted with the truth. I'm going to reject that truth even harder now than I did before. It seems like this is the case with Israel. This is what's happened to them. It's like they've seen their brethren come out of that faith and go into and be added to the church and become disciples of Christ. And what do? They back their ears and say, I believe in less now. You thought you didn't have me before. You really don't have me now. They've been hardened. They've been blinded. Well, who's blinding them? Satan's blinding them. Intentional disregard is that comes from Satan. The devil's hard at work here. The devil doesn't want God's people to be reconciled to him. It wasn't just reserved for the Christian. It was reserved for the Jew that might have become a New Testament Christian. That's the case. It says, just as it is written, God has given them a spirit of stupor. It's an interesting word, the idea of stupor. When you think of stupor, what do you think of? You don't think of somebody who's walking around, lucid and paying attention and comparing and contrasting evidences. That's not what you think about. When you think of stupor, I always think of people maybe who are drunk and are staggering around. They're not really sure where they are, what they're doing, who they are, and they're not cognizant of what's going on around them. They're in a spirit of stupor. He said, give them eyes that they should not see. So that idea of blinding. They've been blinded. And ears that they should not hear. The idea of stopping. Remember, in Scripture it says, several times it says, and they stopped their ears and rushed him. That's happened 3 times in Scripture. They said they stopped their ears and rushed. So this idea of it's at this point that I'm not interested in facts and evidences and apologetics. I'm not interested in that anymore. At this point, I'm done. I'm no longer thinking about it. It's the idea of, think about children who put their hands over their ears and just la 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 la. I'm not listening to you. I can't hear you. I'm ignoring you. That's how they act. This is really how they were acting in a spiritual way. We will not hear. And this is what's happened. I'm sorry? It's absolutely a willful rejection. This is not a matter of being confused by evidences. This is a matter of, I've heard it. It makes perfect sense. Scriptures back it up. Remember that this didn't happen in the dark of night somewhere. The Scriptures had foretold for millennia exactly what would happen surrounding the coming of the Son of God. There was no I'm trying to think of the right word. There was no reason for being ignorant. There's no reason for being ignorant. So it is willful ignorance. It's a decision that's made. Yes, sir. Absolutely. 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 And that would have been, listen, when there's just a lack of knowledge, the idea of unintentional ignorance, in many cases there's a bit of grace that comes into play, right? When somebody does something to me and they had no idea, I had no idea, I'm so sorry. What's my, I may still be a little frustrated or aggravated, but I'm more likely to say, listen, you didn't know, it's okay. It's okay. But when somebody is willfully ignorant in a decision, because remember who we're speaking of here. We're speaking of people who knew the law backwards and forwards and every jot and tittle. They knew the law. They discussed the law daily. They had it they had boxes with it on their forehead and on their hand. These were people who were not ignorant of the law, but they were willfully ignorant of the Messiahship of Jesus Christ. And the idea, it's funny that you would say they were willfully ignorant, but that's exactly what it is. I've heard the truth, or I've heard what you've said, but no. And it's just a digging into the heels and refusal, stiff-necked, right? I'm stiff-necked. I will not bend. I will not yield. It's interesting. What did Jesus say to Paul on Saul, on the road to Damascus? Why do you kick against the goads? I've been trying to get you going the right direction for the longest time, and you wouldn't listen. You're not paying attention. Why are you kicking against the goads? All right. So anyway, here's what the Lord's done for them. And it says, to this very day. He says, and here's the day shall not hear, to this very day. Now, of course, this is old Scripture, but it still is, there's things that God says that are as applicable now. I mean, you don't have to change a word. They're as applicable now as they were to the people that they were written to in the days of the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. I mean, the things that were spoken to those people, you say them now, and it's just as applicable. And guess what, folks? It's just as applicable today as it was 2,000 years ago when Paul was writing to the church at Rome. It's the same. You could read this and you could say, yep, that's it. That's it. Look, God has given them a spirit of stupor. Look at the world around us. There's people wandering around as if they don't know what in the world's going on. They act like they do, and I guess that's a great act that they've put on. But if you really look at them, they profess to be wise, but they are fools. They are fools. They're foolish in their behavior. But they have eyes that they should not see. Boy, talk about the people that with the wisdom of the world, they think they are so smart and they know everything. And you talk to people, and boy, they know it all. You don't have to tell them. You can't tell them a thing. You can't tell them a thing. And here we are, to this very day. All right. Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah. And you know, there are people who are going to read it, and they were going to be confronted with the truth again, and what's going to happen? Some of them are going to listen. Some of them will do what they need to do. The majority of them won't. We have to remember this. You know, the idea where God says, I've reserved for myself 7,000, or some translations say there is yet a remnant of 7,000. We have to remember this, folks, that the church is the remnant. We are the remnant. I don't know if it should give us a sense of pleasure that we are faithful to God in spite of what's going on in the world. As those 7,000, you think those 7,000 men were proud of their obedience to God? And I'm not talking about a willful pride. I'm talking about they were proud of it. They embraced it. You know, they were happy to be servants of God in an increasingly disobedient and wicked nation. They were proud of that, and rightfully so. Folks, we need to be proud when we serve God. We need to be proud of the God we serve, not filled up with puffed up with pride for ourselves. Look at me, but the idea of, there should be a sense of pride in maintaining integrity and faithfulness in an increasingly wicked and unfaithful world. And that's where we are with this. The church is the remnant. And I imagine if God speaks to Satan in the same way that he spoke to Satan in the days of Job, he probably says something along, have you considered my servant? Whatever his name is. I don't know. But I like to think that. All right, and David says, let their table become a snare and a trap and a stumbling block and a recompense to them. Let their eyes be darkened so they do not see and bow down their back always. The idea of let their table become a snare and a trap. This is the idea of let their physical possessions, let their riches become a snare and a trap to them. All of the things that they rely on because they've refused to acknowledge their reliance on you, let the things that they rely on, their riches, their food, all of the blessings of this world, all of those things, let them become a snare and a trap. Does that happen today? Do our physical blessings become a snare? They can, certainly so. They certainly can. I know everybody here has probably known at least one or two Christians who have gotten a little bit of success in the world, and they've allowed that success to pull them away from their first true love. That wealth has become a snare and a trap to them. Whenever we don't rely on God fully for all of the things in our lives, we allow the things of this world to become a snare. Listen, everything can become a snare and a trap. This building could become a snare and a trap, folks. It could. The car that we drive could become a snare and a trap. Our family could become a snare and a trap. Our children, our wealth, everything that we own, everything that we possess, all of the physical goods of this world could become a snare and a trap. And here's what David says: let it happen. And it's not the idea, of course, he's not giving permission to God to allow that to happen. He's saying what he's doing is he's rejecting that concept of not relying on God. He's saying, if they won't do it, then let it become a snare and a trap to them. But his desire is for the children of Israel to remain faithful. His desire is for the Israelites to be the kind of people that God needs them to be. All right? So, continuing on. And at the very last part of that, it says, and bow down their back always. Let them be humble. The idea of bow down their back. Okay? When you kneel before God, let that happen. Let them always be bowed down. Okay? If they're going to behave this way, don't let them be a great nation. Let them be servants. Let them be slaves to other nations. Let them feel the effects of not putting their faith and trust fully in you. If they won't embrace you, then let them embrace a foreign power that you will allow to come and destroy them. Verse 11, I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? Certainly not. But through their fall, to provoke them to jealousy. Interesting. He's going to use what we would normally consider a very negative characteristic, a very negative attribute of humankind. He says, but through their fall, provoke them to jealousy. What are they jealous of? Very next sentence. Remember, we have to understand the relationship between the Jews and the Gentiles. Okay, you got to understand that relationship in order for this to mean anything. Okay, the idea. But what was the attitude of the Gentiles or the Jews to the Gentiles? It was disdain. Complete and utter. Even when they were subjugated by the Gentiles, they still looked down their noses at them. They still saw them as human, kind of, but certainly nothing to be. You don't associate with them. You don't talk to them. You don't do business with them. You don't do anything with them. They are dogs, and we are to give them no regard whatsoever. Yes, we have to pay tribute. Yes, we have to pay tribute to them. Yes, we have to do what they say. And yes, and you go through this litany of things that were required. But at the end of the day, they were still dogs, and they were not worthy of even thinking about. All right. So now you got the relationship between the Jews and the Gentiles, and now you have what? Salvation has come to the Gentiles. Okay, the ability to be reconciled to God without having to go through all of the stuff that was under the old law. You don't have to become a Jew and then become a Christian. You become a Christian. From wherever you are, you become a Christian from that point. Now, do you understand now why he said, let their jealousy? What are they jealous of? What would the Jews be jealous? And they still are what? And when they cling to the old law, what are they still? They're still without God, right? Yeah, they're still searching. They're stumbling around in a stupor. But here are the Gentiles that grace has been poured out on. They've been, so to speak, grafted in. They've been adopted in, whatever nomenclature you want to use. Here they are. They've received this grace, and the Jews are still on the outside saying, well, what do we have to do? What do we got to do? I'm obedient to the law. I've done everything I'm supposed to do. I sacrifice. I tithe. I do all of these things. Why can't I? And here's the Gentile over here who's become a New Testament Christian, enjoying all of the benefits of being a faithful child of God, being immersed in that grace, being added to the church, being adopted by God. He says, let it provoke them. Let it provoke them to jealousy. Let them be jealous. Maybe if they're jealous enough, they'll do what's necessary to get what they have to understand and to do what they have to do. You know, how jealous are you? Are you so jealous that you want what I have? Then you'll do what I did. Hey, I'll invite that kind of jealousy if that's what it takes. You know, be jealous of me in my relationship with God. I've had people say that. Have you ever had somebody say that to you? I really envy your relationship. I really envy your faith. I've had people say that to me, and I know you've had people say that to you. I'm so jealous of the way you're able to let things go, and you're able to love someone even though they've done something to you, and all of these things. Well, great. I want you to be jealous of that. Because if you're jealous enough, maybe you'll do what you need to do to get what I've got. Because guess what? There's plenty of it to go around. You're not going to take something away from me and me not have it anymore. That's a great thing about grace and love and forgiveness. There's not a finite amount of it. It's infinite. God's grace is it can't be measured. So, hey, if you want some, there's plenty to go around. Come and do what I did. All right? But this is what he wants them to do. Why would he want this? Because he still loves his brethren. He still loves his brethren in the flesh. He still loves his fellow Jews. Even though he himself, he's a Jew when he needs to be, he's a Gentile when he needs to be. He doesn't really look at himself in that same way anymore, but on the flesh, he's still a Jew. He says, I still love them. I love my brethren. I love my countrymen. I want them to have what I have. Maybe they'll be jealous enough that they'll come to an understanding and come to repentance. Now, if their fall is riches for the world and their failure riches for the Gentiles, how much more their fullness? I like that. Their failure is riches for the Gentiles. How was the failure of the Jews riches for the Gentiles? When the Jews rejected it, God said, take it to the Gentiles. Now it is time for me to graft on that branch. Okay? And the reason that he did that was because the Jews rejected it. Not that the Gentiles would never receive it. Now understand, his desire was always for every person in the world to have access to this avenue of salvation. It was never for the Jews only, and the Gentiles would forever be excluded. But at this point, they had rejected it, and he says, now it is time to take it to the Gentiles and devote your ministry to them completely. If you can convict your countrymen, that's great. But what I want you to do is concentrate on the Gentiles. So the failure of the Jews was riches for the Gentiles. They now have access where they didn't before. How much more their fullness? For I speak to you, Gentiles, inasmuch as I am an apostle to the Gentiles. So here he acknowledges that God has sent him to them. I magnify my ministry. I like that. Inasmuch as I am an apostle, I magnify my ministry if by any means I may provoke to jealousy those who are my flesh. Who's that? Fellow Jews. And save some of them. So Paul's desire still was maybe they'll be jealous enough to come and do what's necessary. Maybe. He says, maybe I may save some of them. Maybe. I mean, how much despair was there? Because remember, these were his countrymen. These were the people he loved. And he desired greatly. I guess it's the idea that, you have someone who's been given, so to speak, the keys of the kingdom. You know what I mean by that? They've been given everything that they need, and they still reject it. How pitiful that is. How pitiable that is. And he mourns the idea that they've been given everything. God has chased after them, as like Hosea did Gomer. He's chased after him, he's chased after him, he's chased after him, and they still go back into harlotry. They still go back into whoredom. And how that weighed on his mind. Would he like nothing more than to go into his hometown and to realize that all of his friends, all of his family, everyone that he knew were obedient to Christ and New Testament Christians, the disciples of Christ? They would give him nothing more. How many of us would be happy to know that every single member of our immediate family, every single member of our extended family, everyone that we knew were New Testament Christians? Would that make you happy? Does it make you sad when they're not? Yeah. And here's Paul. He's saddened by it. For if their being cast away is the reconciling of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? So if they do accept Christ, what happens? What's happening to them? They're being brought back from the dead. We think about the idea of, has anybody ever been raised from the dead? Yeah, I've been raised from the dead. Not in the physical, but in the spiritual. And this is what's happened. If the Jews will accept the Christ, if they'll accept the Messiah, if they'll accept his message of reconciliation to God and forgiveness of sin, true forgiveness of sin, they will be brought back from the dead, which tells us what? Where are they? They're dead. They're dead in their sins. And until they come back, they will be dead in their sins. If they die in their sins, they are dead. They've been born once and they've died twice. I'd rather be born twice and die once. And that's the case. All right. So, all right, we're almost done. And verse 16, for if the first fruit is holy, who's first fruit? Who was the first fruit? Okay. The lump is also holy. And if the root is holy, so are the branches. Okay? First fruit is Christ. The root is what? Christ. Christ is holy. So if Christ is holy and we claim Christ and Christ claims us, what are we? What does it make us? Holy. Christ makes us holy. We don't make ourselves holy. There's no way on earth for us to make ourselves holy. God separates us, not us. We could claim whatever we want to claim and say, well, I'm withdrawing from this, and I'm gonna believe this, and I'm gonna do these things. Unless Christ is at the heart of it, unless God has ordained it, then there's nothing that we can do to make ourselves holy or separate from the world. Only God can do that, because God is holy. Okay? God has that power, and that's what God has done. He has sanctified us. He has made us holy. He has separated us. We still live in the world, but we're not of the world, so to speak. All right. So if some of the branches were broken off, and you, Gentiles, remember that's who he's speaking to. If some of the branches were broken off, and you, being a wild olive tree, I like that. That's how we're referred to. We're not of the branch yet. We were a wild olive tree. We were out here, sprung up out of nowhere. Really had no reason to even exist. Here we are, and what's happened? And you, being a wild olive tree, what did God do with us? He grafted us in among them. Okay. Now, when you graft I know a lot of people here have done that, grafted trees, grafted vegetables and things like that. I always find that really fascinating. I really do. I find that really interesting. And I've seen them do it, and it's different for different things. But they take that branch, that healthy branch that they know is going to produce what they want. And I want this on that tree, and they cut that off. If it's cut off and it's not grafted anywhere, what happens to it? It dies. Okay? It doesn't have why? It doesn't have any roots. There's nothing to keep it alive. You could probably keep it alive for a little bit of water, but at the end of the day, it's going to die. So what do? They take that and they cut off. They cut off a little section, a dead section of a dead branch on that tree, and then they put it on there and they paint it with this stuff and they wrap it up. Now, once that branch has been grafted on, from where does it derive its nutrition? Where does it get the water from? The roots. It wasn't the root. That root wasn't from that same plant, was it? No. It's getting nutrition. It's getting the water. It's getting the nutrients from the soil from a root that it had no part of before. That describes us. That's us, folks. Unless we can find our lineage all the way back to the time of Jesus Christ before the destruction of the temple, as far as we know, every single body in here is from Gentile stock. Let's just say it like that. But that doesn't matter, does it? We're still alive. We've been grafted in. We derive everything that we need from that holy root, that first fruit. That is from where we derive everything that we have, all of our being, everything that we are, comes from that. All right? And with them became a partaker of the root and fatness of the olive tree. All right, we're going to stop there. Any questions, comments? We're going to finish up chapter 11 next week. And probably get in, because we're almost finished with chapter 11. We'll likely get into chapter 12. So go ahead and finish reading up chapter 11. Go ahead and read chapter 12, and we'll begin discussion with that next week. Looking forward to it.